Well, folks, today we got a handful of stories to bring you today, including some news around Pokopia that actually is going to make the game a much bigger deal than maybe some anticipated, including myself. Pokopia, it actually might be a system seller for Switch 2, if I'm being completely honest. We'll talk about that. We have a cameo appearance of a character confirmed via a toy for the Mario Galaxy movie. Beyond all of that, we also have to talk about, well, how about Final Fantasy VII Remake? Including part 3 here and its development for multi-plat, including Switch 2 and how that might impact things. We have some news there. And last but not least is the headline story. The headline story basically being that there are supposedly sources claiming Nintendo is considering raising the price of Nintendo Switch 2. That story also includes the fact that Sony might be delaying the PlayStation 6. A lot of this has to do with Ramageddon, as it's being called online. We'll be talking about that as well, and maybe revisiting some words that Furukawa said about a month ago about this very situation and the potential of price increasing for Switch 2. Again, potential does not mean will happen, and when you see Furukawa's words, you'll understand where Nintendo is currently standing, at least on this matter. But we can't ignore the reports that exist, and we need to go over that stuff. So before we dive in, I just want to remind you, we are on a road to 200,000 subscribers, so I'd appreciate if it's your first time at the channel, subscribing to the channel. But setting that aside, hey, we have that hype thing. If you're really liking this video and you want to hype it up, it's a brand new feature at YouTube. Don't ask me if I understand how it works, because I don't. I just know that a video needs a lot of hype in order to actually get featured by YouTube. So take that for what you will. And let's go ahead and talk about Pokopia. So as we switch over here, we'll see this article over at Eurogamer. It says, Pokemon Pokopia director Takuto Edagawa, I literally suck at pronouncing names. I'm so sorry. Anyways, he confirms Minecraft-style cloud servers that don't require the host to be online. So Pokopia is looking impressive so far. We've also been told it's a pretty long game, even if you aren't planning on sticking around after the credits roll. With so much to do and a multiplayer option that's promising one of the most relaxing experiences of the year, how do its online functionalities work? Via Famitsu's big interview with key Pokemon Game Freak and Koei Tecmo figures, tip to Kano over on Blue Sky, we found out another bit of info that should please everyone who was already looking forward to the game, especially those who spent way too much time playing Minecraft with friends on private servers back in the day. Before getting into how the multiplayer actually works at Pokopia, game director Takuto Edagawa revealed this project is Omega Force's largest to date. I can't give you a specific number of people, but this is the largest number of people involved in any title developed by Omega Force to date. Moreover, creative work on the game wasn't one-sided, with Game Freak and the Pokemon Company only approving submissions. New Pokemon designs were created and iterated on together all the way through. About multiplayer, Edagawa says it indeed works as explained in the trailer. Released so far, you can either visit a host main island or develop a blank one that's completely separate from the story mode progress. That second one allows players to work together in order to fully develop and reshape it into a peaceful village of their dreams. The important bit here is that even if the host island owner isn't playing, everyone can join in and play. The team is calling this system Cloud Island, and it essentially works like you're thinking, Minecraft's private persistent servers. This potentially means it's a sort of online feature that will one day go offline, but it opens up many possibilities and should make Pokemon Pokopia immensely more attractive for those whose schedules rarely line up. In fact, Edagawa basically states that was the driving force behind the functionality. So that's really cool. And you know what? We're just a little over 2 weeks away from Pokopia coming out. It is, again, not my kind of game, but I do have a morbid curiosity here over how this game's going to perform. Like, how well is it going to chart? How popular is it? What's it going to review? Some people are even now predicting this could actually be quite a high review candidate. That I find to be really interesting to debate on as well. So look, guys, I obviously don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen. We'll just have to wait and see, but I'm sure some of you guys are probably pretty excited for Pokopia, which could be that sleeper system seller. It is Switch 2 exclusive. You can't play it anywhere else, at least at launch. Now, moving on, how about a leak for the Mario Galaxy movie on a cameo appearance? If you don't want to know anything about the Mario Galaxy movie, you're just ready for it to come out April 1st. I understand that, but we do have a leak from a toy. So this is like official stuff here, and it's Rob. Rob apparently is in the movie. He might just be in there as a cameo. He might not actually do anything, but you can see this little set here, and you can see down in this right corner, you can see Rob, and here's a closer look at Rob, a little figurine in the background. Again, whether Rob actually plays like a major role in the movie or whether it's just a neat little cameo in the background, we obviously don't know, but Rob is apparently going to be in the Super Mario Galaxy movie. So I just wanted to point that out for anyone that, you know, enjoys some classic Nintendo. It's not really merch, I suppose. I guess it was an actual thing that you could play games like Gyromite with. So I guess an accessory is the best way to call it. All right. Next up, we're going to be talking about Final Fantasy VII Remake. In fact, we're actually going to be talking about Part 3. Because that is what's in the news today. And we have this from over on Automation. This is relying on Google Translate. I just want to note here. So forgive any translation flubs, but the final installment of Final Fantasy VII Remake will apparently not have lower graphic quality, even when released on multiple platforms. We asked the developers about the concerns they have. And yeah, they did talk to some of the developers. And as we scroll down here, we're going to see some stuff at the beginning. Up until now, Final Fantasy VII Remake series has been developed around high-end platforms like PlayStation 5 and PC, but now it's available on relatively lower-end platforms like Xbox Series S and Nintendo Switch 2. While this is very happy news, there are concerns on social media that the development of the third installment will compromise on graphics in order to cater to lower end platforms. Considering the differences in platform performance, will this actually be affected by the move to multi-platform? Naoki Hamaguchi, hereafter referred to as Hamaguchi, thanks to everyone, both the Switch 2 and Xbox versions have been very well received and have been a hot topic. So I've realized once again that there are many people who are worried. However, basically, just because we've made Final Fantasy VII Remake series multi-platform this time, the quality of the trilogy will not be diminished. And that's not the kind of development structure we have in the first place. I think I have no choice but to keep saying this. And then this guy goes in and says, I think there's probably some basis for what Hamaguchi, who's the engineer, says, but I also think a developer himself wouldn't say something that would negatively impact his own work before it's released. I think it's just marketing talk. Hamaguchi says, I guess that's how people would think, since I've never really talked in depth about why there are no such concerns in interviews. Let me explain. I've heard that people have been excited about these kind of things since the release of the Switch 2 and Xbox Series X and S versions, so I'd be very happy if I could alleviate some of your concerns. Thank you. So let me ask you again. Why do you think that including consoles with different performance levels in the supported platforms will not result in a decline in the graphics quality in high-end platforms? Hamaguchi says, first of all, there are 4 things you need to be careful about when creating a game for each platform. The first is the CPU. This is the calculation part that moves the characters in the game and runs the game logic. The second is the GPU. This is the part related to drawing graphics. The third is RAM, commonly referred to as memory, which is how much data can be read when the game is running. The reason why the Xbox Series S is often said to be difficult to port to is because it has less memory than other hardware. If there isn't enough, the game may hang up. On the other hand, Switch 2 has plenty of memory, so in that sense, it is a platform that is very easy to create games on. And finally, there's the ROM on cartridges and the like. Up until now, it's been necessary to reduce the data size to fit on cartridges and discs. I think there are 4 main things you need to be careful of when creating games. And so they respond and say, yes, I understand. So Hamaguchi says, well, let's break these down one by one. First, in terms of the ROM and the size of the game itself. The packaged version for the Switch 2 will be downloaded via keycard. This means there's no need to make each piece of data smaller to fit on a game cartridge or an increased loading speed. Therefore, it's unlikely to have an impact on the game size on other platforms. The Switch 2 has plenty of RAM, so it shouldn't be affected. It's true that it will struggle with the Xbox Series S, but that's been addressed by fine-tuning each platform to the utmost, so RAM issues wouldn't restrict other platforms. Regarding the CPUs, I think things have changed quite a bit in the last 4 or 5 years. Up until then, 30 FPS was the standard for console RPGs, but with the arrival of PS5 and Xbox Series X, I feel like we are now in an era where 60 FPS is required even on consoles. Well, that's true. Nowadays, 60 FPS is the norm. So Hamaguchi says, our current game development method is based on the idea that if a game runs at 30 FPS on PS4, Nintendo Switch 2, or Xbox Series S, then it should be at 60 FPS on high-end platforms. In other words, we don't design games with the assumption that it'll run at 30 FPS on a high-end CPU and use every last bit of it. For hardware, with CPU power to spare, we use a method of scaling only the density of NPCs in towns, such as the number of NPCs. This means that towns may feel more lively on high-spec hardware, while the number of NPCs may be lower on other hardware. Therefore, even when we support Switch 2 or Xbox Series S, it's unlikely that we're even going to have CPU issues. Finally, I think what everyone cares about the most is the GPU, which is responsible for graphics. When a game is released on multiple platforms, many people like to compare the differences between each platform. Like, they make a video showing the screens side by side. He laughs. And it's actually something I'm curious about. So Hamaguchi says, what worries people is that depending on which hardware the development standards are based on, all platforms will be influenced by that quality. First of all, I want to point out that the most high-end environment is the PC. The culture of playing games on PC is gradually spreading in Japan. but it's actually becoming even more active overseas, where the gaming market is expanding dramatically without barriers between consoles and PCs. The Final Fantasy VII Remake series has been purchased by a number of customers on Steam and the Epic Games Store. So we're also conscious of creating assets for the wider PC market during development. That's why we create 3D assets with the highest quality settings based on PC. When Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was released, there was a lot of talk about how the PC version looked better than the PS5, and this idea remains the same for the trilogy. As a basic data design, we don't conform to low standards, but create assets for even higher end use. We call this reduction, and the design involves adjusting and tuning the asset level to suit each platform. In that sense, it's a design philosophy that basically doesn't affect high-spec platforms. This just isn't something we do, but is a relatively common way of thinking in game development environments these days. So he says, first you make the graphics as beautiful as possible, and then trim and optimize them to suit the platform's capabilities. And he says, that's right. So we need to tune the assets we create with high quality so they can be delivered to users at a consistent level of quality. Optimization is necessary to suit the specs of each platform. But I can say with certainty that it won't impose any restrictions on high-spec platforms. So if you have a high-spec platform, you can just use the assets you created initially without modification. This is going to get completely technical, but we consider PS5 and PS5 Pro to be mid-range platforms. So compared to high-end PCs, the texture size is about 1.5 to 2 times different. Mesh loading is about 1.5 to 2 times different, and the number of polygons drawn is more than 3 times different. So there's a big difference. On the other hand, if we were to say, I don't know, we're currently launching is just adjusting for low specs, it would be the Steam Deck. It is set to less than half the standard compared to PS5. So let me assure you, the quality will not change just because it's a multi-platform capable. So they talk about the PC being the lead platform, and he says that's right. Incidentally, adapting for each platform to simply lower the quality may not achieve the intended expression. So we have a human eye to carefully check and adjust it to make sure it matches. And on and on and on. Basically saying, hey, if you're worried about the high end being affected, we are actually designing the game for the highest of high end on PC. We actually consider PS5, PS5 Pro to be kind of mid-range. Obviously, Steam Deck being the lowest range that they target, and obviously Switch and Xbox Series S, Switch 2 and Xbox Series S fit in somewhere in between all of that mess. So yeah, basically just saying, hey, don't worry about it. We're not going to be hurting the visual quality of this game just because it's coming to Switch and Steam Deck and stuff like that. We're just going to make adjustments to make it possible. Now, this last piece we have to get to deals with an article by Bloomberg, and I will link to the original article down below for those that want to see it. But this basically details the memory crisis going on, known as Ramageddon, and talks about actually some sources talking about PlayStation 6 being delayed and even price increases coming for Switch 2. So as we come in, it says rampant AI demand for memory is fueling a growing chip crisis. All right, so this basically gets down to, since the start of 2026, Tesla and Apple and a dozen other major corporations have signaled that the shortage of DRAM or dynamic random access memory, the fundamental building block of almost all tech, will constrain production. Cook warned it will compress iPhone margins. Micron Technology called the bottleneck unprecedented, and Musk got to the intractable nature of the problem when he declared Tesla is going to build its own memory fabrication plant. We've got 2 choices, hit the chip wall or make a fab, he said in late January. All right, so this has to do with AI data centers and them gobbling up a whole bunch of RAM and everything. And what we want to get to is actually how this is going to impact Nintendo and Sony. So we're going to kind of go down into those sections here, which begins here. The disruption is threatening the profitability of entire product lines and upending long-term plans. Sony Group Corp is now considering pushing back the debut of its next PlayStation console to 2028 or even 2029, according to people familiar with the company's thinking. That would be a major upset to a carefully orchestrated strategy to sustain user engagement between hardware generations. Close rival, Nintendo Company, which contributed to the surplus demand in 2025 after its new Switch 2 console drove storage card purchases, is also contemplating raising the price of that device in 2026. People familiar with its plan said. Sony and Nintendo representatives didn't respond to requests or comment. Now, one thing before I get into my thoughts on the Nintendo side of this, PlayStation 6, what the plans are for that is hard to know. But what I can get into is Furukawa has actually already talked about this, and so I thought it might be good to read his response when asked about potential price increases. So this was from the last investors meeting, which was, my gosh, like a couple weeks back. So here we go. How are the rising prices for memory and other components impacting the profitability of Nintendo Switch 2 hardware? If the cost components remain high, is there a chance of a price revision? Shintaro Furukawa says, We do not disclose details regarding individual components, but we can say that we are working to secure stable supplies of memory components by holding discussions from a long-term perspective with our business partners. As a result, the recent rise in memory prices did not have a significant impact on hardware profitability in the third quarter. In addition, we do not expect any impact in the fourth quarter. However, if this rise in component prices lasts longer than expected and runs through the next fiscal year and beyond, it may put pressure on profitability. If the situation deteriorates significantly, we will carefully assess market trends and respond. As for any future change in the price of Switch 2 hardware, no decision has been made at this time. Any decision to change the price will be determined comprehensively, taking into consideration not only profitability, but other factors like the platform's install base, sales trends, and market environment. So essentially, Furukawa, when asked about this in a more direct manner, already stated a couple weeks ago, hey, look, we're not saying that a future price hike can't happen. It very well could, and we'll respond appropriately at that time. However, we have things to consider beyond just, hey, the profitability of the platform, such as, hey, how good is the install base doing? What are the sales trends looking like? And hey, can the market bear a price increase? Like, would a price increase negatively impact sales so much as to possibly kill the platform if they did it? So this is one of those things where Nintendo is considering a lot when they make these decisions. We know last year when they priced at $450, they were not considering potential tariffs, and then they paused for a moment, considered the tariffs, and kept the console price the same while raising accessory prices. So you have to wonder, what Nintendo is going to do here, if anything at all. Potentially they do nothing. And I want to be very clear. The Bloomberg article states, and I want to make sure we're representing this clearly here. It says, is contemplating raising the price of the device 26, says people familiar with its plans. Now, contemplating, for starters, does not mean is happening. Contemplating just means, oh, they've thought about it. They've had a discussion about it, but nothing's actually come from it. Like, they haven't made any decisions on raising the price. So that's the big thing to consider here is, like, I've seen headlines fly out, oh my God, Nintendo's about to skyrocket the price of Switch 2. And it's like, no. Having discussions on it. We already knew they were having discussions on it. We saw it at the investors meeting when he would refuse to commit one way or another on holding the price or raising it. Obviously, they were already having internal discussions. That doesn't mean anything's going to actually happen, because he did mention they have other things to consider beyond just the profitability of the platform, because obviously they could sell more units and increase software sales, which can make up for the margin difference. So Nintendo is considering a ton of factors when they're debating on whether or not to raise the price later this year. So yes, a price hike could come, but there is nothing stating that today, including this article by Bloomberg that says they're contemplating raising the price, not that they've actually made a decision to do so. Same thing with Sony. They are considering pushing back to 2028 or 2029, which kind of like directly implies the plan was to release PlayStation 6 in 2027. Pretty wild. But yeah, I don't know. I obviously got to throw this out to you guys and see what everyone else thinks about this story, because I gotta be honest, I don't think Nintendo's gonna raise the price. I don't think they should raise the price. I think they should just, let PS6, let the other consoles come out. You hold at $450, you start to look like a steal compared to other platforms. We know Sony's planning to launch a handheld as well. Well, that handheld might come in at, $550, $600 or so. And if you're selling at $450, you're undercutting them by a significant margin, despite them being more powerful. And that can actually also make your platform more attractive. I think there is something to be said about future long-term market viability and not just thinking about the short-term gains of increasing the price. That is my thought process. I can't make those decisions for Nintendo. They have way more data, way more statistics, way more stuff to be worried about than what I'm worrying about just as a consumer, where I would just like to not see the price go up because things are already expensive in many other ways. So take that for what you will. I am Nathaniel Rumpeljans from Nintendo Prime. Sources are all linked down below as always. You guys rock, and I'll catch you in the next video.